This week on a Bear With Me podcast, we're taking it back, way, way back. Join me in turning back the hands of time, traveling to my beginnings as a young nudist. This is the story you don't want to miss. Find out as I explore how early addiction to pornography created a need for me to find a way to deal with insecurities stemming from said addiction, to how that led me to seeking out nudist communities as a remedy. You heard me right. I ended up in a nudist community. And on a serious note, this is a space that I found healing and a love for myself and my body that I had never experienced. We're going to dive into my life to help catch you all up on how I got to this point. Bear with me. This is the Bear With Me podcast, and I'm your host, Jay. And who am I? I'm a 33-year-old black man in America who just happens to be a nudist. My identity as a black man, a nudist, plays a significant role in how I've come to see the world. I came to find nudism through my journey into body positivity, but we'll get back to that in a sec. Welcome to my world. I think it's critically important to reflect on my journey in nudism up to this point in order to understand the impact my past has on where I'm going. If you chose to join this journey with me today, I truly appreciate you. Thank you. I promise it'll all be worth it. Bear with me. Episode 1. This may be episode 1 for this podcast, but this is years of shadow work that I've been doing to get to this moment. Shadow work? What's that, you may ask? Per a good friend of mine, Tierra Lashana, I quote, "Shadow work is a term that is used in spiritual communities that means sitting with the parts of one's self that we are often ashamed of, repressed by. These are parts of our identity that we hide due to trauma, insecurities, anger, fear, doubt, and jealousy. Shadow work is rooted in making peace with all those parts of who we are. Many seek healing in all of these spaces, yet tend to skip over the part of addressing them. The idea is that we have to confront these spaces of uncomfortability. It is doing this work of loving ourselves in the dark so that we can embrace the light." That's a quick definition. Stay tuned because we'll be having Tierra on the show to talk a little bit more about this in detail. But back to a story about me. Though being new to this podcast space, I've been on this journey of self-discovery and body positivity for a while now. I figured the best way for the world to bear with me is to take a moment to really bear with you. My journey of self-love and body positivity began around the age of 13. And the truth is, that work had been happening way before I ever realized that it was. Then a teenager who was going through puberty and a body that was forever changing, I struggled to understand what was happening. Like many, I turned to pornography for answers. And this happened on accident. While surfing the World Wide Web, I clicked on a pop-up, and as they say, the rest is history. That pop-up took me down a rabbit hole of comparing my body to what I was seeing on the screens. What was really only a few minutes of scrolling as a teenager turned into years of self-hatred, insecurities, and anxiety that plagued me well throughout my 20s. And it's something that I haven't mastered yet. Even in my 30s, it's something that I'm constantly having to deal with and unlearn. But as a 13-year-old, something drastic also happened. I remember being on Thanksgiving break, spending some time with family in Atlanta for the holiday. I was up late one night, enjoying the free access that I had to cable television since my mother wouldn't pay for it. I found myself watching HBO. And at the time, my curious mind was there to find content that I really had no business consuming. I came across this documentary called Naked States. Yes, Naked States. This documentary was highlighting the amazing work of Spencer Tunick, who is a world-renowned photographer using nude bodies as his primary canvases. This documentary felt different. Unlike the porn that I become accustomed to, this documentary showed bodies in a way that seemed natural. Even as a teenager, I kind of saw myself in the people on the screen. As the documentary went on, Spencer Tunick would interview several of the people who posed for his installation. These brave souls spoke about their insecurities and how they were excited to pose as a way to actively combat these insecurities. I remember saying to myself, that's going to be me when I grow up. Little did I know, fast forward to my senior year in college, I was back home for summer break. My parents were at work and I was at home alone. After a long semester, time seemed to be of the essence. I began most days exactly the same. I would wake up sometime around noon, find something good to eat in the fridge, take a shower, get dressed, and then go out for the day to find summer employment. This random day in May seemed to be just like the many that followed before it. I did exactly what I said earlier. I woke up for the day, went downstairs to the kitchen, found something to eat for breakfast, returned upstairs, and prepared to take my shower. As I made my way to the restroom, I set the water on the temperature that I would normally set it. I hopped in, enjoyed a nice long shower. I exited, but something was missing. I looked around to my left and to my right and noticed I had left my towel on my bed in my room. And if I could explain the feeling that I was feeling at that moment, like how stupid could I be to leave the one thing I needed when I went to take a shower? To many, this isn't a big deal, but for me in that moment, it was everything. It was indeed a very big deal. I peeked my head out of the bathroom door, knowing that no one was home, but I felt the need to call out just to make sure. Mom, Dad, anybody home? Hearing no answers, I decided to go get my towel. So I'm walking from my bathroom to my bedroom, completely naked. Anxiety on a million. Upon making it to my bedroom, I quickly grabbed my towel, began to dry off, and to cover up. It was in that moment I realized, why was I in such a hurry to cover up? I mean, I was home alone, and I was in my room, with the door closed, I may add. I began to ask myself questions in that moment that I had never asked before, and it caused me to really think about my insecurities and how they were showing up in that moment. The first question was, why was I so uncomfortable being nude at home alone? Secondly, where did I learn to be so uncomfortable? Third, what would I do about this now that it was something that I had come to grips with? These were questions that I wrestled with for weeks. It brought me back to a full circle moment in realizing where my insecurities start from. I realized that prior to watching porn for the first time, I was never really insecure about my body. I never thought about how I measured up to other people, and I never thought about being naked. The earliest moment of being nude publicly was in a locker room during swim practice that my father would take me to on weekends. We would head to the locker room, undress, take a shower before entering the pool, put on our trunks, and enjoy fun at the pool. I never once thought that something was wrong being nude publicly in a locker room. But it seemed like after I was introduced to pornography as a teenager, everything changed. All of a sudden, I was extremely aware of my body. Being nude was something that would never again go unnoticed. But I wasn't the only one who was having this experience at the time. It seemed like everyone in my middle school was obsessed with penis sizes and nude bodies. I had begun to compare myself to adult entertainers, looking on screens and realizing that I didn't look like that. I subconsciously assigned adult entertainers as body goals. It was their bodies that were desirable. And because mine didn't look like that, it was something that needed to be hidden. This is where insecurities and anxiety began. Insecurities and anxiety soon turned into shame. This shame would go on to plague me well into my adulthood. This marked the beginning of the end for me. The end of me being carefree about being nude. I remember avoiding being nude around others at all costs. I would often wear my gym shorts under my clothes because I was terrified at the idea of having to be nude during gym class. I remember showering at home. I remember no longer really wanting to go to swim class because the idea of showering publicly and being seen was terrifying for me. They say hindsight is 20/20. And I mean that to say, as an adult, I realized that my newfound addiction to pornography was something that I needed to hide. It was hiding my new interest that allowed insecurity and shame to go unchecked. I really wish I would have opened up to my father and told him what was happening with me. I believe if I would have done that, that would have erased years of trauma that I experienced. That unchecked insecurity followed me to college. I remember my fear of being nude around others severely impacting my romantic relationships. Although I hadn't really dibbled and dabbled into sex at all at that point, it was something that I was aware of. It was something that I believe people expected in romantic relationships. So I created a barrier. However, that barrier didn't stop at romantic relationships. That barrier impacted all of my relationships. And I created barriers between myself and pretty much everyone. My insecurities allowed me to develop a fear of rejection. I believed at the time that if people really knew who I was and what I was hiding, that they would reject me and that I would no longer be the person that they had came to love. And putting up these walls was killing me in the inside. I've always been known to be a people person. However, during that time, I put up walls that would separate me from the people that I love most. Lucky for me, I've never been one who was particularly comfortable allowing myself to be insecure. I always believed that if I was insecure about something, I could find a way to dismantle those insecurities. As a sociologist, we believe that all learned behavior can be unlearned. So during that time, post-college, being home alone, I used that as my time to begin to unlearn the insecurities that had set root many years ago. I remember creating a new routine. I would purposely forget my towel in my bedroom every morning. This was a way to really challenge my feelings of being uncomfortable, being naked at home alone. So every morning, I would get up, eat breakfast, walk to the shower, and leave the shower completely nude, returning back to my bedroom. And instead of quickly drying off and putting on a towel and clothes, I would air dry, allowing myself time to learn to be comfortable in my skin. This took place for about a year, and that year was life-changing. I began to continue to wrestle with my insecurities and why I was so uncomfortable to being naked. Soon, it became normal. In hindsight, again, realizing that in order to become comfortable with those things that I was insecure about, I had to address them head on. There was no more hiding. There was no more running. There was no escape. The only way that I could truly address these insecurities was by taking a page from the people who were modeling for Spencer Tunick. I had to find ways to actively combat those insecurities. After first asking myself the tough questions of why I was insecure being naked, the second thing that I had to do was find every moment throughout the day that I could spend time naked. I did this for about a year. I also had to separate myself from anyone or anything that would cause me to feel less than, that would cause me to doubt myself, or that didn't really reflect how I wanted to think about myself at the time. The truth is, your surroundings are really important. They say if you want to learn something about someone, look and see who the people that they're connected to, and you'll find who they are. So with that being said, it was essential for me to find community. It was critically important for me to surround myself with people who would affirm this newfound confidence I had in myself, or at least the confidence that I desired to have in myself. So I surrounded myself with friends who would affirm how I wanted to see myself. They didn't let me wallow in self-pity. It didn't allow me to speak negatively about myself. And it encouraged me to grow in the areas in which I often kept secret. Along with finding community, a lot of the work was personal. That looked like creating a new routine for myself. So while spending time in the morning nude, I often would look in the mirror and not leave the mirror until I was able to say 3 things positive about my body. These self-affirmations were critical to me developing the confidence that I desired. I would say things about myself that at the time I really didn't think were true. But as I spent time daily saying these things to myself, about myself, I began to believe them. What started off as me looking in the mirror, struggling to find things about my body that I could affirm. After a month or so, it became quite natural. It was easy for me to say things daily as I looked in the mirror that affirmed myself, that also aligned perfectly with how I wanted to see me. This became a practice that was really important to me learning to love myself. A lot of me learning to love myself was mental. Once I got over the mental block of saying positive things about my body, I believe I was open to seeing myself differently and truly learning to love myself for how I showed up every day. So with all this being said, this pretty much wraps up my introduction story, at least the first part. Tune into episode 2, part 2 of such, in which I'll go deeper into me finding community and what that looked like in my journey to body positivity and nudism. Thank you so much for tuning in and continue to bear with me.